Sit back, relax, and welcome to Reading Hours. Today's book is Mary Poppins by P.L. Travers. Please let us know in the comments from where you are watching, or if there is a book you want us to summarize in future. First published in 1934, Mary Poppins by P.L. Travers is a beloved children's classic that has captured the imagination of readers for generations. The book introduced readers to the whimsical, enchanting, and often mysterious character of Mary Poppins, a magical, no-nonsense nanny who arrives on the winds of a gusty London day to take charge of the bank's children, Jane and Michael. What begins as a simple tale of a magical nanny turns into a broader exploration of childhood, imagination, and the relationship between fantasy and reality. P.L. Travers' Mary Poppins is filled with fantastical events, surreal encounters, and life lessons, but it is also tinged with a certain level of complexity and depth that sets it apart from other children's literature. Travers' portrayal of Mary Poppins is not just of a whimsical figure, but of a strong-willed, somewhat stern character who shows affection in her own peculiar ways. The nanny's ability to instill a sense of wonder in her charges, while simultaneously maintaining an aura of mystery and authority, is central to the story's charm. In many ways, Mary Poppins is a meditation on the tensions between the ordinary and the extraordinary, and how a child's world is shaped by the interplay of fantasy, authority, and imagination. Travers explores these themes through her well-crafted characters and episodic structure, where each chapter presents a new adventure that highlights both the magical qualities of the world and the challenges faced by the bank's family. Throughout Mary Poppins, Travers raises questions about discipline, love, and the nature of authority, often through the lens of the children's interactions with their magical nanny. While Mary Poppins is an undeniably fantastical character, she also embodies a more traditional role of a caregiver, whose task is to provide guidance, structure, and even emotional growth for the children in her care. This blend of the fantastical and the practical creates a narrative that resonates with readers on multiple levels, offering both lighthearted entertainment and a deeper exploration of the role of fantasy in childhood development. In this summary, we will take a deep dive into the chapters of Mary Poppins, exploring the characters, settings, and the magic that make this book a timeless classic. The story of Mary Poppins begins with the Banks family, who live at number 17 Cherry Tree Lane in London. The Banks family consists of Mr. and Mrs. Banks and their children, Jane and Michael, who are in need of some extra help at home. The story opens with the announcement that the family is in search of a new nanny. The children have gone through a number of nannies in the past, but none of them have been quite right. They've either been too strict, too meek, or simply not up to the task of looking after the rambunctious Banks children. It's clear from the beginning that Jane and Michael are both mischief makers and have a particular fondness for challenging authority, which sets the stage for the arrival of a very unusual figure, Mary Poppins. As the story unfolds, it's quickly established that Mary Poppins is unlike any nanny the children have ever encountered. Her arrival is marked by a sudden, almost magical gust of wind that sweeps her up to the doorstep of the Banks household. There's something decidedly mystical about Mary Poppins from the very start. Her appearance is impeccable: her hat, her umbrella, her pristine attire, all suggest that she is a woman who takes herself seriously. However, it is her demeanor that sets her apart. She is firm, but she is also utterly mysterious, with a sense of confidence that borders on the extraordinary. From the moment she steps into the Banks household, Mary Poppins asserts control with a calm, unflappable air. The children, initially intrigued by her, quickly realize that she is not someone who will be easily persuaded or manipulated. She has a no-nonsense attitude and an air of mystery that draws the children in. They're both puzzled and fascinated by her, and they're unsure of what to make of her at first. However, as the days go by, they start to recognize that Mary Poppins is no ordinary nanny. She is someone who brings a sense of wonder and excitement into their lives in ways they never expected. What sets Mary Poppins apart from other nannies is not just her stern yet caring manner, but also the way in which she introduces magic into the lives of Jane and Michael. As the children come to understand, Mary Poppins doesn't just look after them. She opens their eyes to a world full of possibilities and adventures. The most striking aspect of her character is the way she seems to exist in a realm where the laws of nature and reality are constantly bent. With Mary Poppins, the ordinary becomes extraordinary, and the children's once ordinary existence becomes one filled with surprising twists and turns. One of the first glimpses of Mary Poppins' magical abilities comes when she takes Jane and Michael on their very first adventure. In a seemingly simple, everyday occurrence, when they're walking in the park, they find themselves on a fantastical journey unlike anything they've ever experienced before. What begins as a typical outing quickly becomes something far more magical as Mary Poppins leads them through a series of enchanting experiences. In the park, for instance, the children watch in awe as their once ordinary surroundings turn into a vibrant and mystical landscape. The plants seem to come alive, and even the animals in the park act in ways that defy all logic. It is here that the children begin to realize that there is more to their world than meets the eye. But Mary Poppins' magic isn't just about spectacle. It's about teaching the children valuable lessons. She doesn't just perform magic for the sake of it. Her powers serve a greater purpose. Through these magical adventures, she is slowly introducing Jane and Michael to important life lessons, all while maintaining an air of mystery and playfulness. The magic that Mary Poppins brings isn't just about fun. It's about growth, understanding, and a deeper connection to the world around them. At the heart of Mary Poppins' character is her ability to balance discipline and affection in a way that feels natural. She is not a nanny who dotes on her charges, nor is she a harsh disciplinarian. Instead, she is a figure of authority who sets clear boundaries, but also allows room for exploration and imagination. She knows when to be firm and when to allow the children to have fun. In many ways, Mary Poppins serves as a guide, helping Jane and Michael learn how to navigate the complexities of life. Her lessons may not always be explicit, but they are no less impactful. Throughout Part 1, there is a sense of anticipation as the children begin to sense that Mary Poppins is far more than just a nanny. She is a mysterious figure who seems to have an endless supply of tricks and secrets. What makes her particularly captivating is that she isn't always forthcoming with explanations. Instead, she encourages the children to embrace the unknown and trust that, in time, they will understand the lessons she is trying to teach them. This approach sparks the children's curiosity and opens them up to the possibilities of a world filled with wonder and excitement. The arrival of Mary Poppins, then, marks a pivotal moment in the bank's children's lives. Through her, they begin to see the world not as a place of rules and routines, but as a place full of potential and magic. Mary Poppins doesn't just change their world, she transforms the way they view it. And in the process, she teaches them the invaluable lesson that life is not always about following the rules, but about embracing the unexpected, finding joy in the small things, and seeing the magic that exists in the world. As the story progresses, Mary Poppins' role becomes even clearer. She is not just a caretaker, she is a guide to a life that is rich with imagination, creativity, and curiosity. The adventures that unfold with Mary Poppins lead the children to discover new perspectives on their world and themselves. What starts as an ordinary nannying job soon turns into an extraordinary journey of growth, exploration, and learning. As Jane and Michael's days with Mary Poppins continue, the sense of wonder only deepens. Their experiences with her grow more extraordinary and perplexing, as she seems to effortlessly turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. With each adventure, the children's understanding of the world around them is expanded in ways they never imagined possible. One such adventure takes place when Mary Poppins takes them on an outing that at first seems routine, walking through the park. But as has become the norm with Mary Poppins, the ordinary quickly turns magical. They find themselves amidst a vibrant display of animated life as the park transforms before their eyes. Birds chirp in perfect harmony, flowers seem to dance with the breeze, and even the trees appear to smile down upon them. Everything feels alive, and the children are swept away by the beauty and strangeness of the world around them. It is during this outing that the children first encounter a peculiar man who walks backward. This strange sight becomes an important lesson for Jane and Michael. The idea that there is no one correct way to do things. The backward walking man doesn't seem to conform to society's expectations, and yet he moves through the world with confidence and grace. This encounter is a symbol of Mary Poppins' own philosophy. She doesn't believe in adhering to rigid norms or following societal rules for the sake of it. Instead, she teaches Jane and Michael that there is value in seeing things from different perspectives, and that creativity and individuality are worth embracing. This theme of embracing the unexpected continues throughout their journey. The carousel ride, for example, takes them on an adventure that defies all logic. The animals on the carousel come to life, whisking Jane and Michael away into a fantastical realm where they are no longer passive participants, but active explorers of their surroundings. The ride becomes an allegory for the entire experience of being with Mary Poppins, a world that constantly surprises and delights, where magic is not something to be understood, but something to be experienced. In these moments, the children's relationship with Mary Poppins grows. While they remain curious about her and her magical abilities, they also begin to recognize that Mary Poppins is more than just a caretaker. She is a guide, someone who opens doors to new worlds and perspectives. Under her watch, Jane and Michael begin to let go of their skepticism and embrace the wonder of life. They are learning, perhaps for the first time, to be fully present in the magic that surrounds them. Despite the fantastical nature of these adventures, Mary Poppins maintains an air of calm authority. She is unfazed by the world's wonders and complexities, embodying a steady hand that helps guide the children through every new experience. But what's perhaps most striking about her character is the way she creates a safe space for the children to explore their imaginations, while also holding them to certain expectations. This balance of freedom and structure is what makes Mary Poppins a unique and effective figure in their lives. Her role, though, is not purely that of a disciplinarian or a magical guide. She challenges the children to think for themselves and discover the beauty and richness of the world around them. This is a world where the impossible is possible, where imagination takes flight, and where every moment holds the potential for a new lesson or discovery. In one of the key moments in this chapter, after the adventures in the park, Jane and Michael return home, brimming with excitement and wonder. They are full of questions, but as always, Mary Poppins provides no easy answers. Instead, she allows the children to process the magic in their own time. She doesn't explain away the mysteries or try to simplify them. She leaves room for the children to feel the wonder, to let it sink in and become part of them. This is one of the most important aspects of Mary Poppins' character, her ability to let the children experience the world on their own terms. She doesn't force them to understand the magic or explain everything in detail. Instead, she shows them the beauty of the world, trusting that they will find their own way to understand it. In the end, this chapter highlights the growing relationship between Mary Poppins and the bank's children. Through her, Jane and Michael are learning that the world is a place filled with wonder, adventure, and endless possibilities. Their lives, once marked by routine and the ordinary, are transformed by the magic that Mary Poppins brings. And in doing so, they begin to understand that there is no single way to view the world. There are infinite possibilities, and each one is worth exploring. As the days pass with Mary Poppins, Jane and Michael begin to adjust to the magical world that she introduces them to. At first, their interactions with her were filled with wonder and curiosity, but now they begin to expect the impossible from her. Mary Poppins, as always, meets their expectations, weaving a thread of mystery and excitement that surrounds everything she touches. The story takes on a deeper layer of whimsy as Mary Poppins takes the children on yet another journey, one that, at first glance, appears to be a simple and mundane outing. However, in typical Mary Poppins fashion, nothing is ever quite as it seems. On this particular day, they embark on a trip to the park, which soon turns into an adventure beyond anything the children could have imagined. Mary Poppins, with her strict yet enchanting ways, leads them through the park, where they encounter an odd collection of characters and sights. The trees themselves seem to be alive, their branches twisting in unusual shapes, as if they too are part of the whimsical world around them. The birds that chirp overhead do not simply sing, but seem to communicate with one another in songs that are as clear as human speech. The entire park, which Jane and Michael had known as a dull patch of grass before, has now transformed into a vivid landscape of magic and possibility. In this strange and otherworldly park, they meet a peculiar man who walks backward. This figure, though seemingly odd at first, becomes an important part of the lesson that Mary Poppins is teaching the children. The backward walking man, with his carefree nature, symbolizes a new perspective, a lesson in seeing the world through a different lens. At first, Jane and Michael are puzzled by his actions, But Mary Poppins encourages them to not dismiss him simply because he doesn't follow the rules of normal behavior. Instead of questioning why the man walks backward, she subtly encourages the children to accept the unexpected and embrace the idea that there is no one right way to approach the world. This encounter teaches Jane and Michael that there is value in seeing things from a new angle. The backward walking man embodies the unconventional. His movements are not dictated by the ordinary ways of the world, yet they are no less valid for that. Mary Poppins, in her calm and unflappable manner, offers this lesson without being overt. She simply lets the children experience the magic and learn from it themselves. There is no attempt to rationalize the magic or make it fit into their understanding of the world. Instead, they are asked to accept the mystery and wonder of it, allowing the experience to shape them. In many ways, this is the crux of what Mary Poppins imparts to Jane and Michael, a lesson in openness and wonder. Life, she suggests, is not something to be controlled or understood entirely. There are elements of life, beauty, magic, and mystery that can only be experienced through an open heart and a willing mind. The backward walking man becomes an important figure in the children's journey because he challenges them to think beyond the limits of their imagination and to embrace the unknown. But the adventures do not end with the backward walking man. As the day continues, Mary Poppins takes the children to a carousel that holds its own set of surprises. The carousel is not an ordinary amusement ride. It is imbued with a magic that brings the animals to life. Jane and Michael's initial hesitation quickly turns to delight as they find themselves riding these fantastical creatures, which are no longer simply stationary figures on a ride but living beings with personalities and purpose. As the ride begins, the children are transported into a completely different world, a world where the laws of physics and reality no longer seem to apply. The carousel spins them into a world where anything is possible, and they are no longer passive passengers, but active participants in the magic of the moment. The animals, which once seemed like simple wooden carvings, are now imbued with life. Jane and Michael are thrilled, but also, in some sense, transformed by the experience. They have crossed a threshold into a world of wonder that they had never known existed. The carousel ride is not just a physical journey, but a symbolic one. It reflects the larger transformation that Jane and Michael are undergoing under Mary Poppins' care. They are no longer simply children who follow the rules and live within the confines of the ordinary world. They are becoming explorers of the imagination, adventurers in a world where reality is just as malleable as their dreams. This magical carousel ride symbolizes the shift in their perception of the world around them. The everyday is filled with mystery and beauty, if only they are open to seeing it. This growing sense of wonder is something that Mary Poppins nurtures in the children at every turn. Though she remains enigmatic and somewhat aloof, she has a way of encouraging them to engage with the world in a way that is full of possibility. She doesn't force them to understand everything or explain the reasons behind her actions. Instead, she allows them to experience the world firsthand, and through those experiences, they learn invaluable lessons. As the day at the park comes to a close, Jane and Michael are filled with a mix of awe and confusion. They have been swept away by the magic of the carousel and the backward walking man. But when they return to the everyday world, it all feels like a dream. The park, which had once seemed like a dull place, now holds a special place in their hearts, a place where magic is always just beneath the surface. But Mary Poppins is not one to dwell on explanations. She simply leads the children back home, allowing them to process the experiences on their own. She doesn't offer answers, nor does she feel the need to clarify what has happened. Instead, she leaves the magic to linger, trusting that the children will come to their own understanding of it in their own time. This trust in the children's ability to make sense of the world around them is one of Mary Poppins' most remarkable qualities. She does not try to control them or explain every detail of the magical moments they encounter. Instead, she empowers them to explore, discover, and interpret the world on their own terms. This freedom to wonder, to question, and to imagine is the true gift that Mary Poppins gives to Jane and Michael. In this way, she is not just a nanny or a caretaker. She is a guide to a world of endless possibilities, where every day holds the potential for discovery, and where the boundaries of reality are only as limited as one's imagination. Through her influence, Jane and Michael are learning that there is far more to life than meets the eye, and that sometimes the most magical experiences come from simply being open to the unknown. The days following that wondrous adventure upon the silvery sea were quieter, but only in the way that calm follows a storm. In the Banks household, calm never meant ordinary, not with Mary Poppins watching over them. Even in silence, her presence carried the possibility of magic tucked beneath the folds of her prim and proper exterior. It was early morning when Jane and Michael awoke to the curious sound of singing. But this wasn't the kind of singing that drifted from a gramophone or echoed through the streets of London from some distant street performer. This singing was near, very near, and it was unlike any melody they had heard before. It was Mary Poppins, humming softly as she arranged fresh flowers on the windowsill. The tune curled and twisted through the air like the scent of jasmine, so beautiful it made Jane's heart ache a little. For all her sternness, Mary Poppins had a way of bringing beauty into even the smallest moments. After breakfast, which, thanks to Mary Poppins, always seemed to taste just a little sweeter than meals prepared by anyone else, the children were bundled into their coats and scarves. Today, they were told, they would be visiting the zoo. Of course, with Mary Poppins, the word zoo took on an entirely different meaning. As they stepped into the chilly morning, the streets of London bustled with life. The clatter of horse-drawn carriages mingled with the shouting of street vendors, and the sharp cries of gulls circled high above. Yet somehow, when they reached the gates of the zoo, an unnatural hush fell over the world around them. It wasn't a grand zoo, not in size, but there was something strange about it from the moment they entered. The animals here didn't just sit lazily in cages or pace back and forth. They sat upright, reading newspapers, sipping cups of tea, and engaging in deep conversation. Jane and Michael gaped in astonishment as a large lion, his mane neatly combed, adjusted a pair of spectacles perched on his nose. He was reading aloud to a small gathering of zebras, all of whom nodded in thoughtful agreement. Mary Poppins, as always, appeared entirely unbothered. She led them straight to the heart of the zoo, where a grand marble fountain shimmered in the morning light. Around it, animals of every kind mingled together. A giraffe laughed politely with a crocodile. A kangaroo discussed philosophy with a peacock, whose feathers glittered like jewels. "Good morning, Mary Poppins," the lion said, bowing his great head with deep respect. Back so soon, Jane could hardly believe it. They know you, she whispered. Of course, Mary Poppins replied crisply. There are very few places where I am not known. What followed was an extraordinary morning, the kind that leaves behind a memory more vivid than any dream. The children were introduced to animals who spoke in riddles, rhymes, and clever jokes. The lion told stories of ancient jungles long gone. The owl quoted poetry older than London itself. Even the monkeys, usually so playful, sat in quiet admiration when Mary Poppins passed by. But the most breathtaking moment came when Mary Poppins guided them to a quiet garden hidden behind the lion's fountain. In this secluded place, a great serpent lay coiled, its scales shimmering like rainbows trapped beneath glass. Its eyes were wise, far older, Jane felt, than even time itself. You have brought them, the serpent said softly, his voice like silk sliding over stone. Mary Poppins gave a small nod. The serpent regarded Jane and Michael carefully, as though measuring their hearts, their curiosity, and perhaps even their dreams. And then, with the faintest of smiles, he whispered words that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Remember, children, magic is not a thing that lives only in stories. It lives in kindness, in courage, in the wonder you carry in your hearts. Lose that, and you lose the world. And with that, the garden shimmered, blurring around the edges like a watercolor painting touched by rain. The serpent faded from view, leaving only the rustling of leaves and the gentle hum of nature around them. Mary Poppins ushered them back through the zoo, where the animals bowed in farewell. The lion gave Michael a small book. For your adventures, he said. Jane received a single white feather from the peacock to remind you of today. By the time they stepped back onto the streets of London, the noise of the world had returned. The carriages clattered, the vendors called out, and it was as though no time had passed at all. Walking back to number 17 Cherry Tree Lane, the children were uncharacteristically quiet. Their minds spun with thoughts too large to put into words. Thoughts of talking animals, wise serpents, and the endless possibility of magic hidden in the corners of their everyday world. That night, as they lay in their beds, beneath the watchful eyes of their toy soldiers and stuffed animals, Jane whispered into the dark, "Do you think we'll ever go back?" Michael didn't answer right away. But just before sleep claimed them both, he whispered back, "Not if we lose the wonder." Outside their window, Mary Poppins stood beneath the starlit sky, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. She knew, as she always had, that adventures never truly end. They wait quietly in the hearts of those who believe, and for now, that was enough. As the days passed in the Banks household, a peculiar calm settled over number 17 Cherry Tree Lane. Yet, beneath that calm, there always seemed to stir the promise of adventure, the kind of adventure that only Mary Poppins could provide. For the children, Jane and Michael, life had become a series of moments strung together by wonder, mystery, and quiet lessons hidden beneath the surface of the extraordinary. One quiet afternoon, when the wind hummed through the trees like an old lullaby, Mary Poppins announced, in her usual matter-of-fact way, that it was time for a visit to the park. There was never any discussion with Mary Poppins, only the soft, unquestionable authority in her voice that meant things were as they must be. Without fuss or delay, she shepherded Jane and Michael into their coats and hats, and off they went, walking briskly through the well-kept streets of their London neighborhood. The park was peaceful, bathed in golden light that slanted through the leaves. But Mary Mary Poppins didn't simply lead them to the swings or the sandbox like other nannies might have done. Instead, she directed their steps toward a quiet corner of the park where an old man sat feeding the birds. His clothes were patched, his face weathered with years, but his eyes were bright, sharp, and merry, like someone who carried many secrets in his heart. Jane and Michael hung back, watching as Mary Poppins approached the bird woman. She was as much a part of the park as the trees or the statues. Dressed in layers of gray shawls and with a face like wrinkled parchment, she sat by the great stone steps of St. Paul's Cathedral, scattering crumbs for the fluttering pigeons around her. "Feed the birds, tuppence a bag," the bird woman sang softly, her voice as old as time. It wasn't a melody crafted for beauty. It was a lullaby meant for the soul, simple, true, and somehow eternal. Mary Poppins paused beside her but did not speak. The children watched in awe as their nanny, who was often so stern and composed, reached silently into her carpet bag and withdrew 2 shining coins. Without a word, she handed them to Jane and Michael. "Go on," she said softly. "It's not about the bread, you know. It's about kindness." The children stepped forward, placing their tuppence into the bird woman's outstretched palm. Her gnarled hand closed over theirs for the briefest moment, and in that moment, it felt to them as though something ancient and good passed between them. A blessing carried on the wings of 1,000 birds. The pigeons rose in a flurry of feathers, circling the spires of St. Paul's in dizzying patterns. Jane and Michael stood silently, their hearts strangely full. As they walked away, Michael glanced up at Mary Poppins, his small voice curious. "Why does she stay there, Mary Poppins? Doesn't she get lonely?" Mary Poppins gave him a sideways glance, one of those rare looks that hinted at softness beneath her stern facade. "She has her friends," Mary Poppins replied, nodding toward the birds. "Sometimes the smallest creatures are the best company. They ask for nothing but kindness." They wandered deeper into the park, where a surprising scene awaited them. A group of statues, life-sized and regal, stood in perfect stillness along a gravel path. Mary Poppins came to a stop before a marble figure of a young boy holding a flute. To the children's astonishment, Mary Poppins tapped the statue lightly with her umbrella. "Wake up," she commanded. And then, as though this were the most natural thing in the world, the stone boy blinked. His marble face softened into life. He stretched his arms and let out a breath that sounded like the whispering wind through the trees. "Hello, Mary Poppins," the statue said, smiling with quiet reverence. "I wondered when you'd come by again." Jane and Michael were struck speechless. The statue boy turned to them. "Would you care for a dance?" Before they could answer, the other statues around them began to stir. The once silent figures stretched, laughed, and moved about as if waking from a long slumber. The park transformed into a twilight realm where marble met magic. Hand in hand, Jane and Michael found themselves whirling in a dance unlike anything they had ever known. The stone figures were graceful, their movements timeless and elegant. The air shimmered with enchantment, and the ordinary world of Cherry Tree Lane felt far, far away. It was Mary Poppins who ended the spell. "Enough for today," she announced firmly. With reluctant bows and fond smiles, the statues returned to their places, their limbs growing heavy and still. The boy with the flute gave one last playful wink before hardening back into marble. As they made their way home, the children were quiet, lost in wonder. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and pink. Jane looked up at Mary Poppins, her heart full of questions she didn't quite know how to ask. "Mary Poppins," she said hesitantly, "are there always things like that, magic things, right in front of us, and we just don't see them?" Mary Poppins gave her a long, knowing look. "There are more things in this world, Jane Banks, than your books or lessons can tell you. But magic only shows itself when it's ready, and when you're ready to see it." With that, they arrived back at number 17 Cherry Tree Lane. The door closed softly behind them, shutting out the ordinary world. But for Jane and Michael, nothing felt entirely ordinary anymore. The city outside still bustled with its routines, but the children carried something inside them now, a quiet awareness that the world was far larger, far stranger, and far more beautiful than they had ever imagined. And at the heart of it all stood Mary Poppins, the most mysterious, maddening, and marvelous person they had ever known. The days at number 17 Cherry Tree Lane continued to shimmer with their quiet magic, especially when Mary Poppins was near. The Banks children had come to expect the unexpected. With Mary Poppins, ordinary moments unfurled like storybook pages, filled with enchantment, although she never admitted to any of it. It was early one morning, the sort of morning that sparkled with a peculiar stillness, as if the air itself was waiting for something wonderful to happen. Michael and Jane were sitting at the nursery window, watching the sleepy street below. Everything looked just as it always did. The milkman clattering down the lane, the newspaper boy tossing folded pages onto doorsteps. Yet both children had learned that in Mary Poppins' world, even the most mundane of mornings could become an adventure. That very thought was confirmed when Mary Poppins appeared, as if out of nowhere, brisk and proper in her blue coat with silver buttons that gleamed like tiny stars. Her parrot-headed umbrella leaned against her arm, seemingly alert as always. Without preamble, she announced that they were to visit the park. But not just for a walk, no. There was an errand to run, one that could only be accomplished with the children's help. As they stepped outside, the wind seemed to catch Mary Poppins' skirt just so, almost guiding her along the pavement. The children followed close behind, glancing at each other in anticipation. Their destination wasn't the usual part of the park, not the playground or the duck pond, but a quiet, forgotten corner where the grass grew longer and wildflowers bobbed their sleepy heads in the breeze. Waiting, there was a curious figure, a stocky man in a green suit speckled with grass stains. He wore a crown of daisies and had pockets filled with seeds and tiny plant cuttings. He was the park keeper, not the ordinary gruff man who scolded children for stepping on the grass, but the secret keeper of the park, its heart, its stories, its quiet magic. Mary Poppins greeted him as though they were old friends, though of course she barely inclined her head, maintaining her ever-present air of dignity. It turned out that the park keeper needed help. Something in the park was out of balance. The statues, those silent stone figures scattered across the gardens, had been restless in the night. Some had moved slightly, their feet scuffing the earth where they once stood immobile. Jane and Michael listened in awe as the park keeper explained that once in a long while, when the wind blew from a certain direction and the moon hung low enough in the sky, the statues could stir, stepping down from their pedestals to stretch their ancient limbs. But they needed guidance, needed someone to remind them to return to their places before dawn's first light. Mary Poppins, of course, was that someone. She led the children deeper into the park as dusk began to settle like soft velvet over the trees. The statues stood silent and imposing. A stone shepherdess with her lamb, a marble king with a sword in hand, a hound poised mid-run. They looked cold, distant, and yet almost alive. As the wind whispered through the branches overhead, a change stirred the air. The statues shimmered faintly, their stone eyes blinking slowly open. The children could hardly believe what they were seeing. The stone figures stepped down carefully, their movements heavy but graceful, as though remembering how to walk after centuries of stillness. They bowed to Mary Poppins, acknowledging her with silent reverence. For what felt like hours, but could only have been moments, Jane and Michael watched the strange, solemn gathering. The statues roamed quietly, sharing silent stories with one another, stretching their stone arms to the sky. Mary Poppins stood calmly in the center of it all, her umbrella planted firmly by her side. When the time was right, and she always knew when that was, she raised her voice, clear and steady, guiding them back to their places. Back now. Dawn is near. And one by one, the statues returned to their pedestals, settling once again into their frozen poses. But now the children could see the difference, a slight softening in their expressions, as if they were content, perhaps even smiling inside their stone forms. The park keeper nodded his approval, tipping his daisy crown to Mary Poppins. The moment passed, and soon enough, the park looked exactly as it always did. But for Jane and Michael, nothing would ever feel quite so ordinary again. As they walked home through the slowly brightening streets, Mary Poppins remained characteristically silent about the night's events. If the children dared ask questions, she would likely dismiss them with a sharp "mind your manners," or "no need to chatter like magpies." And yet, when they arrived back at number 17 Cherry Tree Lane, Michael was sure he saw the parrot-headed umbrella wink at him, just once, before Mary Poppins leaned it against the hall stand. That night, long after they were tucked into bed, the children dreamed of statues that whispered and trees that hummed with forgotten songs. And in the heart of it all stood Mary Poppins, mysterious, unshakable, and full of secrets they might never fully understand. But that was the way of things when Mary Poppins was near. The world itself bent around her in quiet wonder, not for show, never for praise, but because magic, real magic, didn't need to announce itself. It simply was. As the days moved along in Cherry Tree Lane, the bank's children had come to accept a strange truth. With Mary Poppins, ordinary days always had a habit of turning into something extraordinary. And though they tried to prepare themselves for her curious magic, it always arrived in ways they least expected. This particular day began with a strange new sound drifting through number 17, the distant melody of a gentle, haunting tune that seemed to float in from nowhere. Michael was the first to notice it, sitting upright in his bed and peering around in confusion. "Jane, do you hear that?" he whispered. Jane, already awake, was staring at the ceiling. "It sounds like music, but there's no one outside." Downstairs, Mary Poppins was calmly buttering her toast, as if the mysterious tune meant nothing at all. But the glint in her eye told the children otherwise. She always knew more than she let on. After breakfast, without so much as a word, Mary Poppins led them out the front door. Not in a hurry, not with any sense of urgency, but with the quiet, certain purpose that often preceded one of their adventures. They turned down a small lane the children didn't recognize, strange, since they thought they knew every inch of their neighborhood. The further they walked, the more distant the music became, until it was replaced by an unusual stillness. The streets grew quieter, the trees thicker, their leaves whispering like voices in the wind. And there, at the very end of the lane, stood a curious little shop. It didn't have a sign or windows, but an air of secrecy that made it all the more tempting. Without knocking, Mary Poppins opened the door. Inside, the children found themselves surrounded by hundreds, no, thousands, of tiny glass spheres hanging from the ceiling, glowing faintly like stars caught in crystal. Each orb shimmered with its own light, casting soft reflections all around the darkened room. Behind the counter sat a woman unlike any they'd seen. Her hair was silvery white, piled high atop her head, and her eyes sparkled like the very glass orbs surrounding them. "Ah, Mary Poppins," she said with a knowing smile. "I wondered when you'd stop by again." The woman introduced herself as Mrs. Corey, an old friend of Mary Poppins, though just how old, the children could only guess. Mrs. Corey had an ageless quality about her, as though she belonged to another time entirely. The children could hardly contain their curiosity. They learned that the glowing orbs hanging from the ceiling weren't merely ornaments, they were memories. Every time something special happens, a new one appears, Mrs. Corey explained. Some belong to kings and queens, others to ordinary people who had an extraordinary moment. Jane and Michael stood in awe, imagining their own memories suspended forever in such beautiful form. But Mrs. Corey wasn't finished. With a twinkle in her eye, she reached beneath the counter and brought out a small glass jar. Inside was a collection of golden paper stars. "Tonight," she said, "we shall be hanging the stars." The children didn't understand at first, not until Mary Poppins led them out of the shop and down another winding street, one that seemed to bend and twist in ways impossible for the real world. Before long, they stood at the edge of a great hill, beneath a night sky already dotted with stars. And yet, above them, the sky was oddly empty, as though waiting. Mrs. Corey appeared beside them, carrying her jar of paper stars. Without hesitation, she began to toss them high into the air, and impossibly, the stars didn't fall back down. They hung in place, glowing brighter and brighter until they became indistinguishable from the real stars. The children gasped in amazement. "That's how stars are born," Michael whispered. Mrs. Corey nodded. "In a way, the sky is never finished, you see. There's always room for new wonders." Jane and Michael watched in silent awe as the stars multiplied above them, casting their glow over the hilltop and the faces of those who stood beneath it. It was a moment neither child would ever forget. Eventually, as always happened with their adventures, the night began to slip away like a dream. The path that had twisted so strangely before was now a simple road leading back to Cherry Tree Lane. By the time they reached home, the sun was peeking over the horizon. Mary Poppins, of course, acted as though the night's events were nothing out of the ordinary. "You'll catch cold standing about," she said briskly, ushering them inside. Later that day, when the children sat with Mrs. Banks in the nursery, they told her about Mrs. Corey, the glowing orbs of memory, and the hanging of the stars. But Mrs. Banks only smiled kindly, shaking her head. "My dears, what a vivid imagination you have." But Jane and Michael exchanged a knowing glance, because they knew. They had seen it for themselves. They had stood beneath a sky that was still growing, still being shaped by wonder. And they knew Mary Poppins had led them there. As the day wore on, they noticed a single golden paper star, tucked neatly beneath Michael's pillow, left without a word or explanation. That was Mary Poppins' way, never explaining, never boasting, but always leaving behind just enough magic for them to believe. And so, another day had passed in the extraordinary world of Mary Poppins. A world where even the stars above could hold secrets, and where ordinary children could touch the edges of the impossible as the days passed. The Banks household settled into an odd but oddly delightful rhythm, shaped by Mary Poppins' quiet authority and unexplainable magic. The children, Jane and Michael, found themselves caught between the ordinary routines of their nursery life and the extraordinary moments that unfurled whenever Mary Poppins was near. It was on a blustery Wednesday morning when the air outside howled through the chimneys, rattling window panes, that another curious adventure presented itself. Mary Poppins, precise as ever, buttoned her coat, adjusted her hat, that prim little black one with a cluster of flowers tucked to the side, and told the children, quite without explanation, that they were going out. Jane and Michael exchanged looks. This was not unusual by now. With Mary Poppins, there was never a need for explanation. You went because she said you were going. They trotted after her down Cherry Tree Lane, past Admiral Boom's house, where he stood with a telescope trained on the sky, muttering nautical instructions to no one in particular. The children always felt like they were stepping out of one world and into another when they left their front gate behind her. This time, their destination was the park, the same park they had visited countless times with their old nurse, though never had it seemed quite so alive, quite so shimmering with possibility, as it did in the presence of Mary Poppins. The birds gathered at her feet as though they knew her. The winds that rustled through the trees seemed to pause, waiting for what she would do next. And then they saw him. Bert, the familiar figure of the matchman, stood by the park railings, his clothes dusty with chalk, a long stick of colored chalk clutched in one hand. He was grinning that crooked, friendly grin of his. "Morning, Mary Poppins. Got time for a bit of fun today?" he asked, winking at Jane and Michael. Mary Poppins, without turning her head, gave the smallest of nods. Bert needed no further encouragement. With a flourish, he knelt to the ground and began sketching not aimless doodles, but full scenes, rich and detailed, forming right beneath their eyes. A countryside lane, rolling hills, a path leading off into the distance. "Step in," Bert said. Jane and Michael barely had time to exchange glances before Mary Poppins took their hands and, in the most matter-of-fact way, stepped forward. And just like that, the world changed. They were no longer in the park. The city sounds of London were gone. Instead, they were standing in a meadow sprinkled with wildflowers, beneath skies so blue they seemed almost unreal. The air smelled of sweet grass and distant honeysuckle. A little lane meandered between the hills, and the sun shone with a golden brilliance that warmed their faces. They walked, their steps feeling light as feathers on the soft earth. Soon, they came upon a country fair, all bright tents and fluttering banners, a carousel whirling in circles with painted horses prancing up and down. There were stalls lined with strange and wonderful things, glistening toffee apples that never lost their sheen, striped bags of sweets that refilled themselves, and a game stall where the prizes dangled like treasures from the clouds. Mary Poppins didn't say a word. She simply allowed them to explore, though nothing happened without her watchful eye. Jane won a tiny glass bird from a ring toss game, one that fluttered its wings when she cupped it in her hands. Michael was given a paper hat by a laughing vendor, and when he placed it on his head, it stayed perfectly in place no matter how hard the breeze tugged. But perhaps most astonishing of all was the merry-go-round. "Come on," Bert called, swinging himself onto a painted horse. Jane and Michael scrambled up after him. Mary Poppins, with her usual grace, settled herself on a white horse with a silver mane. As soon as they were all seated, the carousel began to spin faster, until the horses lifted right off the platform, galloping into the sky. Below them, the fair grew smaller. The hills rolled away into green and gold patterns. The sky stretched endlessly. For what felt like hours, they rode on the wind, the horses carrying them over rivers that shimmered like ribbons of glass, forests that whispered stories of long-forgotten times, and villages tucked away like secrets among the hills. But eventually, as always with Mary Poppins, there came a moment when reality beckoned. She raised her finger, a signal that needed no words, and the horses dipped downward, circling back toward the ground. The carousel touched down with barely a jolt. The music wound down. The world steadied. And when they stepped off the ride, they were back in the park. The drawings on the pavement were smudged, washed slightly away by the creeping damp of the evening. Bert gave them a little bow. "Until next time, Mary Poppins." She inclined her head, the smallest acknowledgement. As they made their way home, the children couldn't help but feel the weight of ordinary life settle back around them. The sights of Cherry Tree Lane coming back into focus, the sound of distant traffic reappearing like a spell breaking. But there was always the magic of the memory. When they were tucked into bed that night, Jane whispered, "Do you think it really happened?" Michael was already half asleep, but Mary Poppins, turning off the light, gave them both a look that said more than words ever could. A look that hovered somewhere between sternness and secret delight. For with Mary Poppins, the line between real and impossible blurred until they became one and the same. And tomorrow, who knew what adventure would come next the wind had begun to settle? The once blustery skies now calm above Cherry Tree Lane. The Banks family, however, found themselves forever altered since Mary Poppins descended into their world like a whimsical storm. Michael and Jane, still wide-eyed with wonder, had learned that their peculiar nanny was anything but ordinary. Each day in her presence felt like peeling back the layers of a dream, and today was no different. The morning began quietly enough. Mrs. Banks busied herself with yet another cause, writing letters and arranging meetings in the drawing room. Mr. Banks was, as always, lost in his morning paper, and fretting about his orderly life being nudged ever so slightly off its axis by Mary Poppins' silent magic. But it was the children who waited, with hushed excitement, for their next extraordinary adventure. It came sooner than expected. Without much warning, for Mary Poppins never believed in spoiling surprises, she briskly told the children to gather their coats and hats. They were going on a walk, she announced in her crisp, no-nonsense voice. But this was not an ordinary walk to the park or down the street. No, with Mary Poppins, a simple walk could turn into a doorway to worlds unseen. They strolled through the winding streets of London until they reached a small, forgotten alleyway. One that even Jane and Michael, with their many excursions, had never noticed before. It was narrow, shrouded in shadows, and lined with curious little shops that sold things no ordinary child could ever need. a jar that claimed to capture moonlight, a shop that mended broken shadows, and a peculiar clock shop where timepieces ticked backward. At the end of this mysterious lane stood a shop unlike the rest. Its windows were fogged with what appeared to be stardust, and the sign above the door read, "Mrs. Corey's Everything and Nothing." The children exchanged eager glances. Of course, Mary Poppins led them straight inside. Mrs. Corey was ancient, older than the city itself. It seemed, with tiny bird-like hands and a crown of silver hair that shimmered in the dim light of the shop. Her smile was knowing, the kind only those who have seen the world's greatest secrets could wear. "Well, Mary dear," Mrs. Corey crooned, "bringing the young ones to buy stars again, are we?" Michael and Jane gasped. Buy stars. Without hesitation, Mary Poppins produced what looked like a small, enchanted pouch from her carpet bag. Mrs. Corey, with surprising strength, hoisted a tall ladder and leaned it against the night sky that had somehow unfolded within the walls of her tiny shop. Together, they climbed, Jane and Michael following close behind. And there, amidst the silent, glittering darkness, they plucked golden stars as if they were ripe fruit from a cosmic orchard. The stars shimmered in their hands, humming softly like the distant echo of forgotten lullabies. When they descended, Mrs. Corey wrapped the stars in silver paper. "Mind you don't waste them," she warned playfully. "Stars are precious. They remember everything." Mary Poppins said little, but the glint in her eyes told the children this was an honor they would never quite understand until they were much older. As they left the shop, the lane dissolved behind them as if it had never existed. The ordinary streets of London returned, gray and familiar. Yet, Jane and Michael clutched their tiny packages of stars with reverence, their hearts beating faster than ever. Back at number 17 Cherry Tree Lane, Mary Poppins led them to the nursery. Without explanation, she showed them how to carefully press the stars onto the ceiling above their beds. With a quiet murmur of words that sounded like music, the stars affixed themselves, glowing faintly. That night, as Jane and Michael lay in their beds, their ceilings shimmered with constellations only they had touched. They watched in awe as the stars softly glowed, their shapes forming stories and memories, perhaps of other children, other dreams, or of distant adventures lost to time. But even as wonder filled their hearts, a gentle sadness settled in the room. They knew, somehow, that this moment was fleeting. Magic with Mary Poppins was like catching sunlight in your hands. No matter how tightly you held on, it would eventually slip away. Still, they had learned one of Mary Poppins' quiet lessons, that the world was far bigger, far more mysterious than anyone let on. The ordinary was only ever a thin veil covering the extraordinary. As sleep pulled them under, they dreamed not of toy soldiers or simple games, but of endless skies, whispering stars, and the faint, reassuring tap of Mary Poppins' sensible boots walking the line between magic and reality. And downstairs, in the quiet of the night, Mary Poppins sat by the window, looking out at the sleeping world. She hummed a tune older than words, perhaps taught to her by Mrs. Corey herself, and allowed herself the smallest, rarest of smiles. Because even though the stars belonged to the universe, tonight, for just a little while, they belonged to Jane and Michael Banks. As the days grew shorter, and the winds shifted with the promise of change, life on Cherry Tree Lane seemed to hum with the quiet rhythm of routine once more. But for the Banks children, Jane, Michael, twins. Nothing would ever truly return to the way it had been before Mary Poppins had arrived with her enchanted umbrella and her air of quiet mystery. Their days had been painted with magic, their nights filled with dreams sparked by impossible adventures, and their hearts had grown immeasurably in wonder. Even so, change was inevitable. It was an ordinary morning when Jane and Michael awoke to a curious stillness in the nursery. The sunlight poured in through the window, golden and warm, but there was a peculiar hush, as though the house itself were holding its breath. Their eyes darted immediately to the place where Mary Poppins usually sat, prim and proper, with her feet neatly crossed, but the chair was empty. Panic tingled at the edges of their thoughts. "She wouldn't have left without saying goodbye," Jane whispered, though the wobble in her voice betrayed her doubt. Michael nodded fervently, trying to shake off the gnawing dread that perhaps, like the shifting wind, Mary Poppins had slipped away as quietly as she had come. But then came the familiar tap-tap of her shoes on the stairs, and the children's hearts soared with relief. Yet when she entered, there was something unmistakably different about her. Her carpet bag was closed, her hat perched perfectly on her head, and her umbrella rested on her arm, its handle shaped like a parrot, who always seemed to know more than it let on. "Good morning," Mary Poppins said, as coolly as if the world wasn't about to change forever. Throughout the day, there was a gentle finality to her movements. She straightened books, polished the nursery mirror until it gleamed, and dusted the mantelpiece with deliberate care, all the while humming to herself in that curious way that always sounded like half a lullaby, half a secret. It was Mrs. Brill who first voiced what Jane and Michael had dared not say aloud. "Looks like the wind's changing," she remarked from the kitchen, peering out the window at the shifting clouds overhead. "East wind's blown itself out. Time for new things." Jane's stomach sank. The east wind, the very same wind that had blown Mary Poppins into their lives. After lunch, Mary Poppins took them for what felt like an ordinary walk through the park. But to Jane and Michael, every step felt like a farewell. The trees whispered in the breeze, and even the birds seemed to watch them with knowing eyes. They passed the old bird woman's steps, the same woman from whom Mary Poppins had bought crumbs for the birds. And for a fleeting moment, they thought they saw her ghostly figure sitting there, scattering crumbs. But when they looked again, there was only the stone steps and the flutter of pigeons taking flight. It was as though the entire city knew what was coming. That evening, as dusk fell over Cherry Tree Lane, Jane and Michael could no longer hold back their questions. "You're not leaving, are you?" Jane asked, her voice small. Michael echoed her fear, adding, "We don't want you to go." Mary Poppins turned to them with that inscrutable expression, neither smiling nor frowning, the sort of look that carried both kindness and distance, as though she cared deeply, but could never admit it outright. "I never explain anything," she said softly. "It wasn't cruel. It was just Mary Poppins." Later, as they were tucked into bed, the children listened for her footsteps, for any sign that she might linger by their bedsides, tell them another story, or promise to stay just a little longer. But the nursery remained quiet until they heard the gentle click of the front door. In a panic, they scrambled from their beds and rushed to the window. And there, silhouetted against the moonlit sky, was Mary Poppins' carpetbag in one hand, umbrella in the other, ascending into the night sky with the grace of a star. The parrot head umbrella seemed to glance back at them knowingly, as though reassuring them that all would be well. She didn't wave. She didn't call out. But somehow, in their hearts, they knew she had said goodbye in her own peculiar way. As she rose higher and higher, the wind at her back, Jane and Michael stood in awed silence. Their hearts ached, but not with sorrow alone. There was wonder there too, gratitude, and the knowledge that they had been part of something truly magical. Downstairs, Mr. and Mrs. Banks noticed nothing unusual. Life, after all, had its routines. But for the children, life would never again be quite so ordinary. The next morning, the nursery felt emptier. Yet there was a lingering warmth, a quiet magic in the air that hinted she might return one day when the wind was right. Jane and Michael grew older, of course. Their memories of Mary Poppins softened around the edges, like a dream from long ago. But they never forgot. And sometimes, on certain breezy days, when the wind shifted just so, they would glance at the sky and wonder, half believing, whether a familiar figure might be drifting overhead, watching over them. Because Mary Poppins was more than a nanny. She was a guardian of childhood wonder, a keeper of secrets, a reminder that magic exists if only we know how to look for it. And so the story of Mary Poppins drifts to its gentle close, just as quietly, mysteriously, and beautifully as the character herself. In the heart of Cherry Tree Lane, life resumes its ordinary rhythm. The clock ticks steadily, the trees sway in the breeze, and Mr. and Mrs. Banks go about their daily concerns, largely unaware of just how profoundly their children have been changed. But Jane and Michael know. They know that they have witnessed something extraordinary, something that most people only dream of. Their hearts have been opened to a world beyond the walls of their nursery, beyond the limits of their street or city, a world where stars talk, animals sing, and magic hides behind the smallest corners of everyday life. And most of all, they have learned something that will stay with them forever, that kindness, imagination, wonder, and love often come in the most unexpected forms. Mary Poppins was never merely a nanny. She was a guide, a bridge between the mundane and the marvelous. She never explained her magic because real wonder never needs explanation. She never promised to stay forever because magic isn't meant to be possessed. It visits, changes you, and then moves on, leaving behind its quiet trace in the heart. For the readers and for the children of the story alike, Mary Poppins is a reminder that childhood, with all its wild imagination and belief in the impossible, is fragile and fleeting. But it is also resilient. The lessons we learn, the memories we gather, and the love we receive in those early years stay tucked away in us, long after we have grown. And perhaps that is the true magic of Mary Poppins. She appears when she is needed most. She arrives not with noise or spectacle, but with quiet certainty. She nurtures, she guides, she teaches, without ever making it seem like teaching. And when her work is done, when the children have learned to see the beauty in the world around them, she leaves as suddenly and mysteriously as she came. But she never truly disappears, because in a way, Mary Poppins lives on in everyone who dares to look beyond the surface of things. In everyone who believes in stars whispering secrets, in animals with stories to tell, and in winds that carry more than just the scent of flowers or rain. She lives on in wonder. She lives on in kindness. She lives on in every child and every adult who remembers what it felt like to believe. And so, if you should ever find yourself standing on a quiet street, on a blustery afternoon, and the east wind begins to blow. Listen closely. Perhaps, just perhaps, you'll hear the faintest echo of an umbrella snapping open, and a voice calm and clear saying once again, "Spit spot, best foot forward." For Mary Poppins never really says goodbye. She simply goes until she is needed again.